Hazard pay is coming to you in the third stimulus package. No less than 3 types of hazard pay: public sector hazard pay, private sector hazard pay, and tax credit hazard pay. But how do you calculate hazard pay? Who applies for hazard pay? What is the notion of hazard pay? And how soon could you get paid hazard pay? In this throwback video, I explained the concept of hazard pay, the calculation under the 2020 HEROES Act, $10,000 based upon $13 an hour from January of 2020 to 60 days after the pandemic, on the number of hours you worked, whether part-time or full-time. Enjoy this Overnight LA video explaining the nuances of how to get hazard pay. Hazard pay heats up as that $10,000 from the federal government goes to a vote later this month. But will it get passed, or will the amount get changed? Hey everybody, this is LA Lake with a second stimulus check and stimulus package update for today. This one's about hazard pay, that $10,000 from the federal government proposed in the HEROES Act, which would come to you if you were an essential worker working during the pandemic or still are. There's a lot of chainsaws coming. There's no chainsaw massacre today, but hopefully I survive the rest of this taping. Let me get right to the details. There's really shocking details today about the need to compensate essential workers amid the growing pandemic across the country. As you know, the HEROES Act proposes to pay you $10,000 if you're an essential worker, or $5,000. Moreover, there's state hazard pays, there is business hazard pays, and there's local hazard pays. Let me get right to the great news. And before I start, let me explain that none of these conflict with one another, so you can get all of these. The HEROES Act, which is currently in the Senate from the House, proposes to give you $10,000 if you're an essential worker. Let me first do the calculation for you, because that's the easiest. It's based upon the number of hours you have worked since January up to the present, and going forward if you're not at the threshold. It includes normal hours, part-time hours, temporary hours, furloughed, and overtime. It includes all hours you worked as an essential worker. It can combine hours from 2 different employers as well if they're both essential. That's the easy part. Next part is the way you calculate it. You take $13 an hour and times it by the number of hours you worked. So when you get that number, if you're over $10,000, bam, $10,000 in your account. There is only one scenario in which it wouldn't be in your account, and that is if you made a lot of money last year. Congratulations. If you made a lot of money last year, and again, this is not my term, a lot. This is what Congress says, a lot. If you made over $100,000 last year, you would only be eligible up to $5,000. The other part that's really great news about this bill is that if you're not at the thresholds now, you can continue to receive the benefits going forward. So let's say you're only at $8,000 and are eligible for 10, you would get a lump sum of 8, and then the $2,000 would be paid to you progressively as you go forward. Really great news. The overriding comments that I always get about essential workers is, who are they? What are they? What qualifies? Do I qualify? I've done a lot of videos on that, but the basic premise is that it's generally what you think it is. Grocery stores, anything medical, anything shipping, anything driving like Uber and Lyft qualifies. Anything that you really would think is essential. There are gray areas, which I cover on a daily basis, and those gray areas are a little bit confusing. But the great news is that Congress has said that the hazard pay bill is supposed to be over-encompassing, not limiting. So they want more things included. There's ultimately one part of the hazard pay bill that is just, it makes me want to itch, like Mitch. It's the part that says ultimately the employer shall apply for you and doesn't have to apply for you. I think it's total I think I was about to curse. I think it's totally ridiculous that you're leaving up to the employer to do, and the employer doesn't have to do it. So ultimately, you could have hundreds of thousands of people who are eligible for hazard pay, and the employers just didn't do it because they didn't want to. The Mitt Romney plan, which will be combined with the hazard pay bill and argued together, because that's the way Congress works, pays you a little bit less, $12 an hour, but requires the employer to pay you hazard pay and requires the employer to apply for hazard pay. So that's really great news. Now, the problem that we have is one person, and let me itch, because it rhymes with itch, Mitch. The problem is Mitch McConnell. Because as you know, I said to you on Sunday, Mitch McConnell on last Friday, said, I'm going to debut my second stimulus package, which presumably would either have hazard pay in there or not. And I said, okay, on Monday we're going to find out. Monday came, we didn't find out. Tuesday came, we didn't find out. Well, Chuck Schumer is just beside himself, as I am too, saying, Mitch, what are you doing? Can we see your stimulus package? Mitch's response was silence. When asked by members of broadcast news, and I mean the major networks, Mitch McConnell refused comment. He refused to give America's public any glimpse of what his second stimulus package has in it. So as we sit here today, now Wednesday, I have no news from you as to whether Mitch McConnell wants to provide hazard pay, wants to get rid of it, wants to change it. But I do have this. Mitch wants to build a new building for someone. He introduced a bill today or yesterday about building buildings for people. It's really, really out of touch, and that is where we are. So I don't want you to lose hope. I want you to stay positive and motivated, but we ultimately don't know what's going on with the Republicans about hazard pay. And as I have explained, unfortunately, we have heard little, if nothing, about hazard pay, because really not so much the Republican issue, but the reporters have not asked them the question, so we just don't have an answer. But we will in the next couple days. Now, the important thing for you to remember is that hazard pay from a federal standpoint does not conflict with state hazard pay. In the last couple of days, I've told you to look at your state because a lot of states have now instituted state hazard pay for essential workers. The definition of essential workers does differ from state to state, and it's different than the federal bill that I discussed before, but this is great news. The part of it that's not particularly great news, and I saw someone in the comments, and I agree 100% with him, was that the state programs propose to pay you a couple $100, whereas the federal program proposes to pay you $10,000. So, I mean, they really aren't comparable on the scale, but at least they're paying you something while we wait for Mitch to get his act together. Then there are the businesses, and so a lot of businesses are starting to roll out hazard pay. Yesterday, I detailed Walmart, which some of you love the news and some of you didn't like the news. Walmart is paying essential workers, well, actually, Walmart is paying all their workers hazard pay, and it's going to land in your account in late August. Whether you're temporary, full-time, part-time, laid off, whatever, you're going to get it. The comments were, well, they should have been paying us more money. The movement at this point is that hazard pay is being paid by employers. That's the great news. Now, what's going to happen? Here's the part of the story or this video that's not particularly good news. The particular part that is troubling is a lot of new reports are saying that essential workers may just not go back to work because the number of COVID cases are getting so serious that they don't feel protected and they don't feel compensated by their employers or the government. I detailed that earlier this week, that when Kroger and a lot of supermarkets were under fire by the unions that said, hey, the grocery store unions, that said, hey, you want our grocery store employees to continue to work as the pandemic starts to rage out of control. Pay them more money. Pay them hazard pay. You saw my story yesterday where a lot of groups are now approaching these employers and saying, you need to start paying hazard pay. Well, Dr. Scott Gottlieb doesn't mention hazard pay, but he discusses the impact of hazard pay in a new report today. He says the number of U.S. coronavirus cases could reach 300,000 deaths by the end of the year if the trend continues. Right now, this is his quote, he says we have close to 1,000 deaths per day because of COVID-19. If you don't change that trajectory, you can do the math. The problem is we're hospitalizing a lot of patients. He says that, he told this to CNBC today, that the U.S. may have around 300,000 deaths and growing if we don't fix this and we don't start to curb it. Right now, we have close to 1,000 casualties a day, so if we don't change that trajectory, we're going to see a massive number of deaths. He thinks it could be far more than 2,000 deaths per day. He's the former head of the FDA under President Donald Trump. And he says that medical workers are really not starting to show up. I detailed that yesterday. This, again, is talking about essential workers who may start to not show up for work. In Florida, over 30 hospitals now are at full capacity and don't have enough nurses. And when asked for more nurses to show up, they didn't. This is different than in March, where you heard a massive movement by essential workers across the country to mobilize, to show up, to travel, and to help people out. That movement's not happening because a lot of them don't feel like risking their lives this time around. The death rate of confirmed cases is about 3.6%, the Wall Street Journal reports now. And the problem is that where we're seeing hospitalizations, a lot of this is increasing. It's likely to be in hospital use because of the side effects affect a profile. So they're promising therapeutics, but some states have chosen not to see this. We need to make a decision what's important for us, and we're willing to sacrifice right now, but until we get to that other side, it's not going to happen. What's not going to happen is that if essential workers are not compensated, they may just not show up. So imagine a universe with late or early, imagine a universe of late July, early August, in which Mitch McConnell has still not figured out how to compensate essential workers. And those essential workers are seeing COVID-19 cases in hotspots like California, Arizona, Louisiana, Florida, and Texas rage out of control. And those essential workers simply choose not to show up to work anymore. Well, what's going to happen? Ultimately, a lot of those businesses could shut down, and you may not have those essential services which you dramatically need. This is a concern that Gottlieb expresses in the report. What's so important for you to understand is that you are essential. I value your services. The other viewers of this channel value your services. You are entitled to hazard pay. You should get hazard pay. But as the pandemic rages on, there's very little movement from the other side of the political spectrum that needs to introduce their Mitch Onse bill so we get hazard pay moving. Ultimately, what's going to happen in the next couple of days is what? You say, LLA, what's going to happen with hazard pay? Is hazard pay going to pass? I think it's going to feel like going to the dentist. It's going to feel like pulling out teeth because we are really not seeing from Mitch McConnell what's going to be in that second stimulus package. So if I was here to tell you that he doesn't have hazard pay, I would deliver you bad news. I'd say, okay, here comes the battle. It's not in there. I just don't know if it's bad. I don't know if it's good for Mitch. And ultimately, I really don't care what he says because it's going to be a topic of discussion. But the fact that Mitch is working on getting someone some buildings and not getting you a second stimulus package is really troubling. Ultimately, if you have questions to today's video, drop in the comments below. This has been some week. We're about 3 days away from 100,000 subscribers. Thank you for always being a part of this channel, staying positive, staying motivated, and staying smiling. It's like times like this where we don't see things that you really got to keep smiling and stay positive. I appreciate your support. We are all family. And as always, stay with LA for more.